there are three things that you can invest or you can leverage to make money from properties. Number one is either money. If you've got the money, then great, you can invest it and you can make money off of it. Number two is time. If you haven't got money but you've got time, then you're going to have to leverage your time to make money from real estate. That's where strategies like deal sourcing comes in. Hey, welcome to another episode of Fire Podcast. My name is Cynthia and I am your host. So today we're going to be talking about some of the property investment strategies that I think are absolutely fire. Like, you have to start with them. I honestly think everyone should be investing in real estate. Everyone should, start some sort of property investment business, especially as a woman, because property investment is one of the best ways to ensure a financially free future. Do you understand? Like, you want to be able to, have assets that will constantly make you money. And one of the best ways to do that is through property investment. So what I've found, just, by speaking to different people and, hearing people's stories and experiences, what I found is that a lot of people don't actually fully understand all the strategies that's involved in property investment. A lot of people think, to be a property investor, I need to have 25% deposit on a property and be able to purchase a property, spend tens of thousands of pounds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds, in buying a property and then, like doing the work, refurbishing it or renting it out to, a nice family or to students or something. A lot of people just assume that is just like the one route to property investment. But there's actually so many different strategies when it comes to property investments. There's actually so many things you can do, so many strategies you can start with. Some of them you can even start with no money at all. So today, I will be talking to you about all the different strategies and how you can get started today, irrespective of your financial background, your history, your experiences. All of those things are quite irrelevant when it comes to property investment, because there's smart strategies that you can start with, or as I like to call it, savvy investment strategies that you can actually start with, that you don't have to put in your entire life savings, or you don't have to wait till you're old and grey to get started. You can actually get started today, right now, where you are. Let's get into all the strategies, okay? So there are so many ways you can make money from property. You don't always have to put down a lot of money to get started. One of the strategies that you can actually get started with today without any money, it requires zero money to get started, is something called property deal sourcing. And what is property deal sourcing, or who is a property deal sourcer? So property deal sourcing is where you go out and find property deals that are interesting for property investors. So you can find things like below market value properties. You can find rent-to-rent deals for investors who are looking for such deals. How do you find these deals? You go on property search engines such as Rightmove, Zoopla, even Facebook. You can find property on Facebook. Gumtree, you can use OpenRent. There's so many different ones that you can use. Prime Location. You go on there, you contact as many homeowners and agents as possible, or you can even go out on the street. If you see to let signs on properties, you can contact the homeowners and let them know what you're doing. Tell them you have investors who are ready to take on the property, and you can just tell them, listen, agree a rental value for that property with the homeowner or the agent, and make sure that the numbers match up. So make sure that when an investor takes on this property, they will potentially make money from it. So you're going to have to do all that analysis, understand what sort of strategy this property would suit best. Is it rent to SA? Is it rent to service accommodation? Is it rent to HMOs or social housing? Or if you found a below market value property, make sure that there's a good amount of discount on the home before you even present it to investors, because what that allows you is to be able to charge a fee for finding that deal. So most deal sources are able to charge up to 4,000 or 5,000 for a rent-to-rent deal. right? And also when it comes to below market value properties, you can charge a certain percentage of, the cost of the house, or a certain percentage of the discount on the house. For example, if the house is worth, let's say £500,000, right? And you've managed to negotiate a deal for your investors, and you've managed to agree a sales price of £400,000. That means you're potentially saving your investor about 100k. What that allows you to do is you can then say, okay, cool, I will charge you 5% or 10% or whatever percentage it is that works for you. You charge the investors that percentage based on the 100k savings that you've made them. So imagine if you charged a 5% commission, or finder's fee or sourcing fee, whatever you call it. If you charge a 5% on 100k, that's an automatic, I think that's £5,000. And if it's 10%, £10,000, 15%, £15,000 just off of that one deal. So property deal sources are able to make a lot of money from even just one deal, because even with rent-to-rent deals, like I said earlier, you can charge anywhere from £2,500 up to £5,000, and probably even more depending on the actual deal per investor and per property. So you can actually have the potential to make a lot of money, and you don't need any money to start. Like I said, you don't have to purchase a property, you don't have to rent a property, you don't have to do nothing at all. You just find the properties, you invest your time, because when it comes to real estate or property investment, there are three things that you can invest or you can leverage to make money from properties. Number one is either money. If you've got the money, then great, you can invest it and you can make money off of it. Number two is time. If you haven't got money but you've got time, then you're going to have to leverage your time to make money from real estate, and that's where strategies like deal sourcing comes in. And the third one is knowledge. You can leverage your knowledge about the real estate, industry or property investment strategies. You can leverage whatever knowledge you have about property, and you can make money that way from properties as well. The next strategy is rent. Some of you might have heard about this term, rent to rent or R to R, or some of you might not, but I'm actually going to just go into it a little bit more and explain how that works and how you can actually make money from rent to rent. So what is a rent to rent? Just like the name sounds, you rent a property and you rent it out again. It's literally that simple. So when it comes to rent to rent, there are different, call it sub-strategies if you like, that you can actually invest in. So you can either do a rent to SA or rent to HMO or rent to social housing. Rent to SA stands for rent to service accommodation, which is basically rent to Airbnb or, rent to short-term rental, whatever term, that works best for you. Rent to HMO stands for rent to house in multiple occupation or house of multiple occupancy. So what does that even mean is basically when you rent a property out, let's say you rent a 3-bed house out, and then you rent out the rooms individually. Instead of renting it out to a family who just takes it on as a 3-bed family home, you rent out the rooms individually to either professionals, students, or just whoever is looking for a place to live but can't really afford to rent an entire house. So you rent it out to those type of people, and they pay you rent every month based on each room. Do you understand? So you're not collecting one collective rent for the house. You're collecting rent based on the rooms. Okay? So that way you can also make a lot of money. Rent to social housing basically is where you rent the property and you either rent it out to the council, or you rent it out to a supported living company, or like a social housing company that provides housing needs for people who are looking for it. So let's talk a little bit more about rent to SA, right? So when it comes to rent to SA, you can rent anything from a studio apartment to a 3, 4, 5-bed house, depending on the demand in the area. The most important thing is to obviously make sure that there's demand wherever you take on the property. So you basically, again, go on Rightmove, Zoopla, and all these property search engines, and you find properties that are out for rent. You can even target properties that have been out for rent a little bit longer and it still hasn't rented. Those sort of homeowners or agents are usually a little bit more motivated to rent out their properties. So you can reach out to them and tell them, listen, I want to take this property and I want to use it as a rent to serviced accommodation. I want to use it as a serviced accommodation or short-term rental. And you tell them you're going to take the property for a long period of time, usually 2 to 5 years, and you pay all the bills. You manage the property at no extra cost to them, and you take on that property and you furnish that property, decorate it, make it look nice and visually appealing, and you put that property on Airbnb or booking.com or any other online travel agency where you can go and you can attract guests or people that can book your property. So once you've listed your property on an OTA, which stands for online travel agency, you can now begin to attract guests, and those guests pay you a nightly rate instead of like a monthly rent. They pay you a nightly rate, and you can charge. Your nightly rate can be anywhere from like in the UK, I'll say anywhere from like even £20 a night to hundreds a night. Do you understand? It just depends on the property, the area, and like the location, type of property, what's in the area, and all of that. It all depends on several factors, right? And what the average nightly rate is in that area. So like a property in London could, let's say a 1-bed flat in London can potentially rent out for anywhere from £120 to £180 a night, depending on the area in London that it is located in. And that way you can make money. So if you had like a good occupancy rate, let's just use the average figure of 150 a night, and you've got 22 nights booked in a month, you can be making up to £3,300 a month. So now you just have to consider how much rent you pay to the homeowner, what the bills and maintenance cost. And once you've deducted all those expenses, the rest of the money left is now your profits. Okay, so that's how you make money from a rent to SA. But when it comes to rent to SA, you need to make sure the property looks a little bit nicer, like compared to some of the other strategies, because people will only book your property based on the aesthetics of the property. So if it looks nice, if it looks comfortable, if it looks clean, people will book. Do you understand? As long as there's demand in the area. So that's another strategy that you can invest in. When it comes to rent to SA, how much you need to start, it's really, really dependent on, again, the size of the property, the location of the property. So let's calculate how much you need to actually start a rent to SA. So we're going to use, for an example, a 1-bed flat in London. A 1-bed flat in London could cost anything like £1,300 to £1,500 a month. So let's just go in the middle and use 1,400 as our average. So you got that flat for 1,400. So you got to pay the first month's rent, which is 1,400. And let's say the flat isn't furnished at all. So now you've got to spend anywhere between £1,500 to £2,000 furnishing that property. So again, let's just go for £2,000. You also need to pay a security deposit, which again is usually 1 month's rent or 5 weeks rent. So, but let's just, for the purpose of this calculation, say it's 1 month's rent. So again, it's another £1,400 that you need to put in for the deposit. First month's rent and the deposit needs to be paid before you can actually even take on the property. And then before you can list the property on any OTAs, you would need to then pay the, furnish the house, set it up, make it look nice and everything. So you're looking at around 4,800 just to, take on this 1-bed flat and, put it on Airbnb. But now this might be a little bit different if you had a 1-bed flat with the same rental price, but it was fully furnished. Your initial investment might just be the 1 month's rent and the 1 month's deposit, which could be just 2,800. So it all depends on, the property, the state of the property. Some properties you might take on and they need a little bit of cosmetic work done to them because, they're so run down, and you can't just put a rundown property on Airbnb and expect someone to book it. So you have to do a little bit of touching up. So all those things will really affect how much money you need to start a rent to Airbnb. So usually the best way is, if you've got a small amount of money, you can just work within your budget. You can start with a studio apartment. You can see if you can rent out a studio apartment, because studio apartments would typically cost a little bit lower. You can try and target more furnished properties if you haven't got the money to, invest in furniture. But there's also ways that you can actually source cheaper furnitures, like buying on Facebook Marketplace, buying from charity shops and so on and so forth. But yeah, so that is that with rent to SA. rent to SA. And just imagine you have this property now and it's 1,400 a month, your rent that you're paying. And on average, you're making 3,300 from how we previously calculated. And you're making 3,300. It might cost you anywhere from £500 to £700 for your bills and maintenance monthly. So that's, let's just say £700. So 1,400 plus £700 a month for your bills and maintenance. That comes up to about 2,100, and you're making about 3,300 on average on Airbnb from that property. So that means that your profit is about £1,200 profit that you're getting from that property, which is really good. So this is how you can make money from just one property that you don't own. You don't need to buy the property and you just rent it off people. When it comes to rent to HMOs, again, very similar to rent to SAs, you'll be offering the same, terms in terms of like, longer tenancy period, management, and, like looking after the property and everything. But the difference between the rent to SA and rent to HMO is, like I said previously, you just rent out the rooms individually. So with the rent to HMO, let's say for instance, you've got a 3-bed house and it's got 2 living rooms. So either one of those 2 living rooms can be converted into bedrooms, rentable bedrooms, right? So now you've got 5 rooms to rent from that 3-bed house. And it has a decent kitchen and maybe like a conservatory, or maybe not, but it has a decent kitchen, right? And what you do is you rent out those 5 rooms to, people who are looking for like a room to rent or something like that. Usually professionals or students or anyone really that can't afford to rent out a big house. Because to be honest with you, in today's economy, a lot of people can't afford to actually rent out a whole house or an apartment or a flat just to themselves. They would rather share because that's what they can afford. So those sort of people would be your, target tenants. So what you would do is, take that property on, furnish it. Usually when it comes to HMO, you just need like the minimal furnishing. But I know some people like to go all out and set up their HMOs as a serviced accommodation, make it look really nice and pretty. I personally don't do that because what I found is over the years, when you do that, the tenants move in, they chuck all your decors and all your decors and all the soft finishing that you've put in the house. They don't like it, they don't need it. They chuck that in some storage where it will sit and collect mold or dust or something, and they just bring in their furniture. So I prefer to just put in like the basic furniture in there. So all they literally need is a bed, mattress, wardrobe, and a table and chair. Maybe sometimes I might put in a little side bedside cabinet. That's all I put in my HMO properties, and that's all I found that you really need. Most tenants will move in and put in the rooms what they want to put in. But when it comes to rent to HMO, how do you actually make money from that? So let's say, for an example, the 3-bed house that you rented was up for rent for £2,000, right? And you've rented it out as 5 individual rooms. So you've got 5 rooms in the house and you've rented all those rooms out. So on average, you've rented out the rooms in that property for an average of £650 a month per room. So when all your rooms are occupied at full occupancy, you will be expecting £3,250 from all your tenants every month. So by the time you subtract the rent, £2,000, and also deduct the bills for that, which will be around, I would say around £500, you will be left with a profit of about £750 just off of that property. And when it comes to HMO, the bigger the property is, usually the more money you can make, because they say the first 3 rooms pays for the rent, and then the 4th room will probably pay for the bills. Your profit really starts off from like the 5th, 6th, and however many of our rooms there are in the property. So the more rooms you have, the more money you can make, basically. Again, you don't need to buy a house. You don't need to invest thousands in purchasing a house. You don't have to go through the whole process. All you need is, again, just the first month's rent, the deposit, which will probably be another first month's rent. So in this case, 2,000 times 2, £4,000. And then if you were just buying bed, mattress, wardrobe, and a table, usually what I find is it costs about anywhere from £500 to £600 per room to put in those furniture that I just mentioned. So multiply that by how many number of rooms that you have. You'd be able to work out exactly how much you need to start. So it's always good to just figure out what your budget is to start with, and then you can find properties that fall within your budget. That's the best way to do it. So that's that with HMOs. What you need to consider with HMOs is that you would require a license, but you can actually go online to every council's online platform, their website or something, and you'll be able to find a list of HMO properties in the area. So you can actually target your search to those particular HMO properties that already have a license. And that's how you make money from a rent to HMO. For me personally, the difference between a rent to HMO and a rent to SA is that with the rent to HMO, the income or the money that you make every month is consistent. So whereas with a rent to SA, it's not consistent because rent to SAs are affected by seasonalities and demand, right? So every season, when it comes to rent to SA or Airbnb, there's seasons, and some seasons you can make a lot of money, other seasons you can make very little money. And that means that your income isn't consistent. It fluctuates every month. So you need to make sure that you're prepared to handle that as well. Whereas even though you might not make as much as you would with a rent to SA, the income is consistent and it's the same thing every month. So at least it gives you something to expect. Every month you're going to make X amount of money. And that's it. So rent to social housing, again, very similar to the rest, but you just rent out the property and you rent it out to, a social housing company or supported living company, or even the council. You can rent it out to the council and they pay you. So you can rent out the same 3-bed for, let's say, £2,000. And instead of doing HMO or SA with it, you just say, oh, do you know what? I really don't want anything. I don't even want the stress of managing this property. So I'm just going to pass it on to this supported living company or this relocation agency company, or I will transfer it to the council so they can put in their council tenants in there. So you just do that and then you rent it off to the council or whoever else it is, and they pay you a certain amount of rent. You might be able to charge only, like, say, maybe a couple hundred more than the rent. So let's say the rent you're paying the homeowner is £2,000. You might be able to rent it out for maybe 2,500, 2,600, depending on the area, and to either the council or supported living company or relocation agency. All of those people, you can rent it out for a little bit more money, and you hand it over to them, and they deal with all the management, and they put in their tenants in there, and they look after the property. And you just basically get that 2,500 that you've agreed with them every month. You take your £500 profit from it, and you hand the £2,000 over to the homeowner for their rent. And that's basically how it works. And that's how you can make money from rent to social housing as well. There's also another strategy that isn't really talked about often, and people don't really know much about it as well. It's something called lease option, right? So let's say you want to buy a house, but you can't necessarily afford to buy a house right now. Let's say, for example, you just got a nice fancy new job, and you know that you're going to work that job for the next 3 years and you're going to be making X amount of money. And in 3 years' time, you'll be able to afford to buy a house from your savings from that job. Let's just, assume that. What you can now do is, okay, you may not be able to buy a house now, but you know that you have the potential to buy that house in the future. What you do is you can target properties that are for sale and offer them a lease option. So what is a lease option? A lease option is where you rent a property from the homeowner with the option to buy that property after a certain period of time. It could be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But whatever it is, the time period will be agreed at the start. So that property might be worth £350,000. You don't have the deposit to buy that property now, but you really want to either take on that property to live in for yourself, or you want to take on that property and actually use it as an investment, right? You want to use it as a HMO or a serviced accommodation or any other thing that you have in mind for that property, but you don't have the actual physical cash to buy it now. When you feel like you can actually now afford to buy this property, so you can take on that property, rent it out, pay the rent to the homeowner, and also manage the property as if it was yours. So you will be acting as a homeowner, even though you don't legally own the property. So if there was any issues, any damages, you fix it. And then after the end of the 3 years agreed period, you have the option to buy the house. So having the option to buy means that you're not legally obliged to buy the house at the end of the agreed period. So even after 3 years, you can decide, you know what, this property really didn't work out how I expected it to. So I'm just going to give it back to the homeowner. I don't want to buy it. And you can just walk away from that deal with no legal penalties or anything like that. And what can you do with a lease option property? You can either rent it out as a service accommodation, or you can use it as a HM, or you can again use it as a social housing accommodation. You can even package that deal and sell it off to someone else, and they just pay you rent as if you were the homeowner, and then you pay the homeowner whatever the agreed rent is. So there's so many different things you can do with a lease option. You just need to understand what strategy works best for you and for that property in the area as well. So yeah, that's basically how you can, get on the property ladder. Especially like I know someone who actually bought their family home using this lease option strategy, right? And where can you find lease option properties or a property that you can apply this strategy to? Well, again, property search engines like Zoopla, Rightmove, Prime Location, On the Market, like all these places where you can go and buy or find properties to buy or sell. And when you're searching for a property to apply this lease option strategy to, it's worth also even looking for like older properties that have been listed for a long time as well. So those people, the sellers again, might be more motivated to just, get the property like out of the way and then move on with their life. So they might be more inclined to accepting a lease option, right? So that's that for the lease option. Another strategy that's very similar to lease option is something called exchange with delayed completion. So it's basically where you take on a property and you find a property that you want to buy. Again, you don't have the money to buy right now for any reasons, and what you want. So you essentially go up to the homeowner and agree to buy that property in 5 years. Let's say it's a £500,000 property. You want to buy it in 5 years, but you haven't got the money to put down right now. So you can agree to buy that property for even as little as £1. Yes, you can actually buy a property for as little as £1. And what you can do is agree that sales price of £500,000, and you have to put down a deposit at the time of the agreement, which can be as little as £1 or £50,000, just depending on the situation, the property, the owners, motives or what they want, what they really want from the property. Because you might find a homeowner that just wants to sell because they need 20k to pay for something or whatever it is, or just they need some bulky cash for something else that they want to do. You can find a homeowner who isn't really motivated by money. They don't really care about the money. And you can offer them £1,000 or even £1. They just want to get rid of the property. You can find a homeowner who isn't really motivated by money. They just want to get rid of that property for any reason. And you can then come up and offer them, hey, I can give you £1 today, and in 5 years, I will pay you the full £500,000 for this property. And then once I've purchased it in 5 years' time, I will then become the legal owner of the property. But in the meantime, in that period, the homeowner is still the legal owner of the property, and you are just like a potential owner or just like someone renting the property at the time. Again, just like lease option, you take on the management of the property as the homeowner. You literally don't have to involve the homeowner in anything. You can really do anything you want with that property. The difference between a lease option and an exchange with delayed completion is that at the end of the agreed period of time, with an exchange with delayed completion, you are legally bound to buying that property. So you have to complete that purchase. Otherwise, there could be legal penalties, against you for that. You might be charged fines or whatever it is that, that was in the agreement as a consequence of pulling out from the deal. That could be legally applicable to you. So you just need to bear that in mind. But again, exchange with delayed completion is another fantastic way to get on the property ladder for most people who don't actually have the money right now. What you can do is you can take on that property, you can start renting it out as a HMO, SA, whatever it is, and you can actually start saving up the deposit every month for that house. So instead of taking the money that you make from that house and spending it all as your profit, you can choose to put some aside every month so that in 5 years' time, you would have built enough money to put down as deposit to fully buy the house. So the next strategy is BRRR. What does BRRR stand for? It basically means buy, refurb, or rehabilitate, or renovate, or reconstruct, whatever word people like to use for the first R. But then you basically buy a property, refurbish it, refinance it, and rent it. So that's 3 R's: refurb, refinance, rent. Right? So this is usually best for like auction properties. It's when people go into auction and they find a property that, suits their needs. Maybe they want to do SA, HM, or whatever it is, or they just want to rent it out to a nice family. They go into auction, they buy the property. When you buy a property at auction, in most cases, you will purchase that property slightly below the average property value in the area. So what you would do is you would go and buy that property. It will usually be in a bad state or just need some sort of modernization. You take on that property, you do all the work that needs to be done, and you can now rent out that property. This is one great way to actually grow your property portfolio in such a short period of time and also make a lot of money. Because when it comes to BRRRs, how do you even make money from that? Again, buy a property on auction below market value, add some value to it. You might just, paint the walls, make it look nice, modernize it, add new furnishing in there, like change the kitchen or whatever it is that needs to be done in that house. Then now you've added value, you've now increased the value of the house. So you might have bought the property for 100K, and now with all the works, and then you may spend like, let's say, £20,000 doing the works that needs to be done in the house. Now the new value of the property is 180K. What you've essentially done is increase the value from 100K to 180K. When you deduct your initial investment, which is 100K to buy the house and another 20K to do the works, you are now left with a 60K profit. Now you can go to your mortgage lender and tell them you would like to refinance this property now at the new value, and you will be able to pull out your initial investment and also some profit that you have made from the house. But obviously bear in mind that when you refinance, you have to leave behind 25% of that new value in the property. But still, in most cases, you still be able to at least pull out all your initial investment and some profit. And you can then use that to repeat this process. And this process usually, like the process of buying at auction and doing up the property and, renting it out, usually lasts anywhere from 3 to 6 months. So in a year, you could do a couple or more of deals like this, and just imagine how much money you can make just from doing that. And when it comes to buying at auction, in most cases, you would need to buy cash. And most times you hear people saying, hey, I bought this property cash on auction. When they say cash, it doesn't always mean their own physical cash. And you might be thinking, I haven't got 100K to put down on a property. The truth is, most people in the UK don't have 100K to put down on a property straight away, right? However, you could actually, get a loan, something called a bridging finance, which is basically a loan designed for this particular sort of strategy, and where you can take out a bridging finance loan. You can use that, you can bridge the gap between however much money you've got and however much money you've got to pay for the house. But usually with this type of strategy, you're going to need some sort of money to start with, usually in the thousands. So I would say, depending on the price of the house, I would say you need to have at least 10% of the sale price of that property. So if you're buying a 100K property, you would need to have at least 10K of your own cash. Not even just your own cash. It could be investor finance. It could be a collection from a group of friends, coming together and putting down that 10K together. But you just need to have at least 10 to 15% of that, the value of the house. Then you can go out to a bridging company and say, hey, listen, I've got this amount and I need this amount. And there's lots of different bridging companies out there with different rates. So it's always best for you to, make sure that you do your research and find the one that works best for you when taking on a bridging finance. I feel like anyone can do it. You don't really need experience. However, you might need some sort of guidance or mentorship to be able to do it right, because there's certain things that could go wrong. In any of the strategies that I have mentioned, you will need some sort of guidance to do it right. The final strategy that we'll talk about today is property development. And that's where the big girls and big boys are playing, okay? So what is property development? It's basically, buying a house or a land or, like a block of business, a business block or something, and then converting it to a residential house or a group of residential houses. So when it comes to property development, there are two types that we're going to talk about today. And the first one is commercial to residential development, which is just like the name says, you buy a commercial property. This could be, like an industrial estate or a block of shops or a block of businesses, whatever it is. You buy that, you either knock it down or reconstruct it and convert that to a residential place. It could be a block of flats. It could be, separate individual homes, but you obviously do that and you convert it, and then you can expect to have a new GDV, gross development value, on that property. You can buy like a land as well. The next one is land development, where you buy an empty land and you just build, houses or whatnot, a flat, whatever it is, residential dwellings on that piece of land. Now, when it comes to property development, like I said, this is where the big boys and girls are playing at, right? Because you can make so much money from this. You could purchase a commercial building for, let's say, 300k, 350k, whatever it is, and you can then, start all over again on that site and build blocks of flats or series of apartments or houses. So you can actually change the value of that particular site from just the 300k that you bought it for to up to like 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, depending on the land, the size, the area, and how many houses you build. You can have like mad, like GDV at the end. And this is where you can actually create like really long lasting, like generational wealth and, like financial freedom, financial security, all of that nice stuff that everyone wants to do or likes to hear. This is the level where you can begin to start, doing that at like a big level. But what you need to bear in mind is when you're doing property development, you usually would require quite a lot of money as well. So some lenders can actually give you 100% of the development costs or the development finances. Some lenders can give you up to 100% of that if you own the land outrightly. So there's no mortgage on the land. Let's say the land was worth 150k or 300k, like I said earlier, and you just purchased that land at that full price. You can find some lenders that can give you 100% of the cost of the development. So you might need like £1 million to do all the development that you need. You don't necessarily have to have that 1 million. If you can purchase the land at 300, you may be able to find a lender that can give you that 1 million that you need to do your development, and then your gross development value at the end could now be like maybe 3.5 million. You pay back your lender and whoever else that's involved in the business, and whatever is left becomes your profit. And this is how you make money from property development. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this episode today. Wow, I feel like I've been talking for so long. Jeez. If you found this video helpful or informative or educational, whatever it is, make sure to stay connected with us on social media, because I also post a lot more on my socials. You can connect with me on either Cynthia Neri or fire.podcast. Okay, so thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting. If you liked it or if you learned something from it, give us a thumbs up. Let me know if you've got any comments or any questions below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you all, and I'll see you all in my next one.